Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Forum, sponsored by the Hampton Roads Committee of the 200 Plus Men. My name is Philip Jones, and I am honored to be your moderator for tonight's discussion. Tonight, we will be discussing the current update on COVID-19. To that end, we have Dr. Carter joining us here tonight. Dr. Carter is an exceptional member, and I've had a lot of pleasure, reading and learning about himself and his bio. So before I give it over to Dr. Carter, I will now share his bio. Dr. Carter is a native of Chicago, Illinois. He attended college at Duke University and Howard University. He attended medical school at the University of Illinois, residency at Rush Medical College, and fellowship at Duke University Medical Center. Currently, Dr. Carter is the owner of Carter Medical Associates. Additionally, he's an assistant professor of internal medicine at the Eastern Virginia Medical School for the past 10 years. He currently resides in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Sir, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I look forward to learning more about yourself and obviously the status of COVID-19, especially in our region. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, my friend. And again, thank you for the invitation. It's certainly an honor being part of the Hampton Roads Committee of 200 Plus Men, and I am certainly here to serve. And so this is a reasonable service to an organization that I've grown to love. So thank you so much. And so without question, our lives are being changed by the COVID-19 virus for the past 2 years. And so the more we learn and the better we understand how it works, I think it serves the entire population. Me as a Black physician, I have specific goals in mind too, because I want to protect my own population, which is our people of color. And so with that in mind, this presentation is directed towards people who look like me and talk like me and come from where I come from. So let's go ahead and start the presentation. Seiko, if you want to run the slides for me, please. So I have no disclosures to add at this point. I have no financial interest in this presentation. I do it freely and without compensation. Next. So the primary sources of my goal here is that we are a community-based group. The Hampton Roads Committee serves 7 cities and also wider populations. And so we decide that we are a valuable source of comfort and support. And so we as a resource, we have the ability to address concerns, the fears and anxieties of our community that we come from. We obviously, our goal is to promote recommended preventive measures and to keep track of them. And of course, next, manage fear and stigma. As you well know, there's been much misinformation over the past 2 years. And so if we can help clarify some of that, we've done a great job. We want to restore a sense of calm, and we want to make sure vulnerable populations understand that there is a safety net in place and people like us, they can come to for comfort, information, and service. Next, please. So let's talk a little bit about viruses in general. Viruses are living organisms, and they all mutate at various rates. As it turns out, coronavirus is able to mutate at a much faster rate than other things. Things like influenza and hepatitis B, they mutate as well, but not nearly at the rate that coronavirus has adapted to. And just like any other living thing, if there's no vector to live in, their mutation rate will slow. And so our goal is to prevent there being any vectors available for coronavirus to live in and to mutate in. Studies show the vaccination, of course, reduces the amount of infection and also leads to reduced transmission and overall disease. That makes intuitive sense. If it has fewer people to live in, it certainly will not thrive as easily, and eventually it will die out. The last line is something I need you guys to understand. We went from an endemic infection at the end of 19 and the beginning of 2020, where it was unknown and misunderstood, and we had no idea how to work it. Then we went into a pandemic phase, which is pretty much all of 2020 down to maybe September, October, which means we learned some things about it and we were able to come up with some mitigating strategies. And we learned, obviously, that vaccines would help kill this thing. I think now in 2022, we are more in an endemic phase, which, just like seasonal influenza, it's always going to be around, it seems. We've never come up with a permanent solution to kill influenza, and I think coronavirus is going to be the same way. It's going to be a permanent factor in our lives, and we just have to figure out how to control it and to keep it from causing too much damage and death. Next, please. Right now, we're in the Omicron variant. It's the latest variant in the United States, and it follows the Alpha and Delta. The Omicron is far more infectious than its previous cousins, which means the contact time is 5 to 10 minutes, whereas it was considered a prolonged contact with Alpha and Delta in order to get you sick. So it's more infectious, but the good news, it appears to have a less lethal effect. And we can talk about the factors behind that near the end of the presentation. The incubation period is shorter. It's only 2 to 4 days, whereas Alpha and Delta, we learned, were a 7 to 10-day incubation phase before you felt sick and knew for a fact that you had the disease. So with Omicron, if somebody coughs or sneezes on you or touches your hand and you touch your face, in 2 to 4 days, you should know that you've caught an Omicron variant of COVID-19. Because it's more infectious, the sheer numbers of people who are going to get sick from Omicron far outnumber the people who were infected by Alpha and Delta. But as you will learn later, that's not all bad news, but still the susceptible folks who have the right inside manufacturing will still get sick enough and die from Omicron, although not nearly at the rates that we saw previously. And so we aren't seeing mercy ships docked on the Hudson River in New York, and we don't see refrigerated trucks outside the hospitals to act as temporary morgues. But the few people who are really susceptible and vulnerable, they will absolutely die from Omicron. Next, please. So let's talk a little bit about vaccines themselves. And I'm sorry if this is too elementary, but vaccines are designed to aid the immune system. It is not designed to be a replacement for the immune system. So you have to have an intact immune mechanism in place for the vaccine to use. But they help prevent severe disease. They certainly help prevent accompanying diseases, including the heart disease, the GI disease, all of which we now know corona can create. They obviously also can prevent death. It is currently believed that you have a 70 to 80% less likelihood of death from coronavirus once you've been vaccinated. And that certainly seems to continue to be playing out. We now have 6 known variants. And I guess if my memory of Greek alphabet still works, pi will be next, pi, which is also the name they give to that theoretical number, 3.14159. Just some useless trivia for you. So far, the vaccines are still effective. And as it turns out, the vaccines seem to be effective against all the variants, no matter which one you get. Next, please. So, as I said before, with coronavirus, just like with influenza and hepatitis B, there's no definitive cure for it. And so they do have some oral agents. I think Merck has an oral product, and of course, remdesivir has been around for about a year now. And it does mitigate people who are sick from coronavirus. And there is some evidence that those oral medications have some value. Medicines like remdesivir were designed to treat things like influenza and other viral illnesses. And they did studies and showed that it also has some effectiveness against corona too. Not nearly as effective as the illnesses for which they were designed, but some benefit is better than none if it keeps you alive. We now have 3 preventable vaccines, which I will go through in some detail later, and there are still more on the way to approval. Vaccines are produced, and this is really basic virology, if the disease has a high fatality rate, which means it'll kill you if you don't check it. And so that's really the point of vaccines. They don't raise vaccines to everything. They do raise vaccines, however, to things that will kill you. Next, please. So, as I said before, we've got 3 vaccines circulating in the United States: Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson. I will go through a slide later which will discuss some of the effectiveness of one versus the other. But as far as I can tell, they are all very useful, and they are by far better than nothing. The Pfizer Moderna require 2 initial doses and a booster dose later. Johnson & Johnson requires a single dose vaccine, and we are certainly encouraging people to get a second dose of whatever you get, even if you got the single Johnson & Johnson vaccine. The efficacy seems to be pretty good. As far as we can tell, you have a 76-fold immune response, which means you were relatively not immune at first, and now you have a 76 times response to fight this thing once you get the vaccine. That is an amazing number. Next, please. So the whole point of it is so that if you get infected, and again, I want to reiterate, the vaccine doesn't stop you from getting infected. It just stops you from having all the bad stuff happen to you. But there are certain risk factors for severe disease, and this is where the conversation about people of color comes into play. Diabetes, high blood pressure, and heart disease increase your risk for severe disease and death from coronavirus. Smoking, chronic lung disease like asthma and COPD also increase your risk. And so I'll just give you some commentary about that. Unfortunately, people of color have much worse control over their diabetes, their high blood pressure, and their heart disease in general. Now, the reasons for that you can write many books about: access and resources and just myths and disbelief about medical care in general. But the simple fact is, if you have uncontrolled diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, lung disease, coronavirus eats you for breakfast. And we have to do the best we can to prevent that. A recent study said, in Chicago, my hometown, minorities represent 30% of the population, but 70% of the COVID deaths. The same has also been demonstrated in Michigan and Louisiana. 32% of the population and 70% of deaths. I mean, we are dying at twice the rate of our representation in the population as people of color. And that is something we can do something about. That is a preventable thing. Next, please. So for our population, the people we touch, we are the Hampton Roads Committee of 200 plus men, and we have outreach to people who look like us. Our message to them has to be, after this talk, control your diabetes now more than ever. Take your high blood pressure religiously, whether you're vaccinated or not. And again, there is still a huge population of our people who still have doubts about the vaccine. And again, I'm not here to preach about that, but whether they take the vaccine or not, you now know that if they take their blood pressure and diabetes medicines religiously, they have a much less likely chance of getting it and much less likely chance of dying if they get it. And we have to help them understand that there's a relationship between your cardiovascular system and the immune system. And, the reasons why are really complicated biochemistry and physiology, which really has no relevance. You just need to know that there is a connection between your cardiovascular system and the immune system. There is some relationship and some factors that are communicated between your vessels and your heart and your immune system, and that makes coronavirus more deadly to us. There's many reasons to stop smoking, but this is certainly something that adds to that conversation. And finally, this is a topic of real sensitive subject matter. Identify areas of potential racial bias in your local health care delivery system. So if your local health department does not have an outreach program that recognizes the racial disparities and outcomes with COVID, you get to call them on it, because this is not news. This is not new information. If your hospital system that you also work in don't cover COVID-related screening and health and wellness programming for people of color specifically, you get to call them on it. It's okay to tell them, I now know if you don't help people of color control their diabetes, high blood pressure, and lung disease, we do worse. And we as leaders in the community get to call them on it and have an opinion about that, now that you know the difference. Next, please. So as I said before, there are 3 known vaccines, and our vaccination is now available to anyone above the age of 5. And I'll show you the slide later, which tells you which one is appropriate for younger age people. Moderna is 18 plus and Pfizer is 5 plus. Now, the children are also impacted by corona, but just seems a different disease with them. Children who get coronavirus tend to recover more quickly than the adults because, and this is my speculation, I think it's because children have fewer chronic diseases that make their course more difficult. But there have still obviously been cases of severe COVID in the Delta variant and some deaths in the Delta variant. We have not really seen that repeated in Omicron. You just need to know that kids can still get coronavirus and that there is still Alpha and Delta out there. Even though Omicron is taken over as the big brother, there are still some Delta and Alpha out there, and it does impact our children much worse than Omicron. And the CDC, of course, is also still doing ongoing research about these things. But the other important thing you should know is that we talk about a booster dose somewhat inappropriately. What we're really talking about is the next dose of a series. And I'll try to be somewhat clear about that. When you get an influenza booster, it is unrelated to the flu shot you got last year. When you get a coronavirus third dose, it is related to the doses you've already received in the 5 months before. And so we use the term booster because it's a term that people understand and appreciate, and they certainly at least understand that it's something they should do to continue their health. But that is really a misnomer. That's not really what you get. You're getting a third of the original dose. And so it's number 3 dose of the Pfizer and Moderna and number 2 dose of Johnson & Johnson, and not truly a booster. And I wouldn't tell people to stop using the term booster. You just need to know that that's really not the scientific basis of this shot we're giving folks. We're giving it as dose number 3 of a series. The same as you go and get a hepatitis series. You got to get 3 shots of hepatitis B vaccine, and it's at 2 months, 6 months, and a year. That's actually what we're giving. It's not like a booster you get from a year ago from flu vaccine. The other thing is that the third dose you get is significantly lower than the first dose you get. And all 3 of the booster / next doses have different potency and work differently in each different person. And if you have questions about that later, we can talk about it. But I got the first 2 doses of Pfizer, and I did great. But I decided to mix and match the third dose with a Moderna dose, and it knocked me on my butt. So we can talk about that later if you like. It was all of the vaccine manufacturers chose different parts of the particle to raise their vaccine from, and as a result, you as an individual person will respond differently depending on which one you get and how your body responds to that particular one they raised. Next, please. So this is the graphic I was describing earlier. So Pfizer you can get 5 months after second dose. Moderna you can get 5 months after the second dose. By contrast, though, with Johnson & Johnson, you could get the next dose up to 2 months after the single dose you got. And as it turns out, getting that next dose certainly lowers your risk of prolonged disease. It lowers your risk of getting it again. Because just like any other virus, for instance, influenza, you can get it over and over and over again in the same season. So getting that next dose lowers your risk of getting it. And this is a schedule in which you can get it. Next, please. Next, let's talk a little bit about testing. Because again, that's been a bit of a controversial topic too. You can get at-home testing kits now at the drugstore, and you can just pick them up at the health department and just test yourself at home. And it's a fairly reliable test, but it's got a lower sensitivity than the gold standard test. The gold standard test is what we call the PCR test or molecular test, which has to go to a laboratory for processing. The PCR test takes 24 to 48 hours to process depending on which lab you use, whereas you can get a rapid test and know in 15 to 20 minutes if you're positive. The real value of both of them is to tell you if you have the infection or not. And so whether the sensitivity of the rapid test is a little bit lower than the PCR or not is irrelevant if that test is positive. If it's positive, it's positive no matter which test you use. The only controversy comes in is if your rapid test is negative and you have symptoms and you have your doubts. If your rapid test is negative and you have symptoms and you have doubts and suspicions, please get the PCR test. There is absolutely no downside to getting that PCR test if your rapid test is negative. Now, local politics dictate whether or not you can get that rapid test for free or where you can pick it up and how many you can get. The CDC recommends that people can get up to 8 tests per family member each month, which I think is a little bit excessive, but it is what it is. And if you want to stock up on it, find out where it's available, because the CDC says you can get up to 8 per month. That's a recent ruling, and I think the government supports that initiative. And as I said before, you can do the rapid test at home. PCR needs to be done in a lab, and both of them are useful, particularly if they're positive. And certainly if your PCR turns out to be negative, that should be some level of comfort to you, because it is a really sensitive test. A negative PCR or molecular test should give you great comfort that something else is going on with you and not COVID-19. Finally, should I get an antibody test? Only if you're going to need the results for something. I travel a lot for work, and so they asked me for my vaccine card, and before I had my vaccine card available, I had my antibody test result, and I just folded up and had it in my wallet and showed it to the screeners, and they said, okay, you're good. So get an antibody test if you want to prove that you've been infected and that you're now immune, if that's important to you for a job or for travel or for other personal reasons. I don't think everybody needs an antibody test because everybody doesn't need it for those reasons. But sure, there's also plenty of reason to get an antibody test if it will serve you and make your life a little bit easier. For instance, if you're in international travel and they don't trust your vaccine card, you can at least show them if you've had the disease before. That may allow you to get back in from customs. Next, please. So, what should I do either whether I'm vaccinated or if unvaccinated? And this is what you guys share with your wide circle of friends and family. Stay home when you're sick, except to get medical care. And now I hear some urgent care centers and ERs don't even want you to come if you're sick. They want you to be treated remotely for symptoms. Wear a mask, even if you're asymptomatic. Social distance, that still makes sense. Cover your coughs and sneezes with a tissue and then throw the used tissue in the trash. If you don't have to remove your mask to do it, just raise the mask a little bit, wipe your nose, and cover your face with the mask again. Wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. We encourage people to sing the birthday song while they're washing their hands, especially after going to the bathroom, before you're eating, and after blowing your nose. These things that we learned 2 years ago are still useful right now. And so if you don't have soap and water available, make sure you use a hand sanitizer with at least 60% alcohol. And there's plenty of those out there on the market. And as far as I can tell, it doesn't matter where the hand sanitizer comes from, whether it comes from China, the US, or Europe. As long as it has at least 60% alcohol, it'll be effective in killing the coronavirus on your hands and on surfaces. Next, please. Avoid touching your face with your unwashed hands, especially your eyes, nose, and mouth. You'd be amazed how many times you touch your face. I mean, they did a study about it, and it was in the hundreds per day. Clean your high contact surface areas, all the stuff you already know. Review the guidance provided by the CDC. Lately, the CDC has been all over the place, and so you have to check it a lot if you're interested. I certainly check it every day, because the things I do when I teach people at the jails and prisons, it has to be accurate and up to date. Now, this is what I need you to know. And even me as a physician, I use this as my guiding principle. The CDC principles are only guidelines. They're not law. And a lot of people are confused about that. When the CDC posts their recommendations, it's not written in stone. There's been no law passed to make it true. Their guidance has been good, but as I said before, in the last 6 months or so, they've been really erratic about their recommendations. And so I look at it, I read it, and then I process it with the information I already have to find out if it's applicable to what me and mine's need. And I want you to do that too. If it's applicable to what you and yours need, follow it. But if it doesn't make any sense or it's not applicable, it's not written law. So that's what you need to know. Thank you. Next. So review your national, regional, and local guidelines. As you well know, our current governor has lifted the mask mandate for many. Again, you don't have to do that. I encourage you to still wear your masks no matter what our current governor says or feels. He's not a doctor. Our previous governor was. And I don't have a bias against non-doctors, but if somebody who's not a doctor wants to undo things that a doctor did, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, and so I'm just not going to do it. So please have people to continue to wear their masks. And again, like I said, all of this is regional and state and national. And so please review what other people are doing around you who are similar to you. And for people of color, for instance, I mean, there's big controversy and conversation about whether we should have, in-person church or virtual church. All that stuff is relevant to us. And so please ask people that you trust their advice and recommendation. Clearly, if there's been a recent outbreak at the church and they are not halting service, that doesn't make any sense, right? So please use common sense with these kind of things and follow the science. Next slide, please. So my primary resources for this conversation: updates from the CDC, state and local public health authorities, and also community traditions and practices. If you got people in the community who you trust and whose opinion you think makes sense, all that has to be factored in when you make these kind of decisions and when you continue to search for new information, because the information continues to change. Next, please. I think that's it, right? Community leaders, us, Hampton Roads Community, unique position during these times. We have to understand the nature of spread, and we use our faith and our sense of community, because nobody can do better for us than we can do for ourselves. The consideration and encouragement of people to take the vaccine and the third dose is not a rejection of your faith. Don't let anybody tell you that. You educate, you plan, you implement, you reassess whether or not those things are working. And if things are not working, be willing to change direction. Because this is a dynamic process, clearly not a static process, because we're already up to Omicron. And again, educate yourselves into why a vaccine is useful for everyone. Those who have poorly controlled high blood pressure, diabetes, and lung disease, and also the people who are perfectly healthy who have to go to the grocery store. This vaccine is important for everybody because the person who's healthy and goes to the grocery store will still get COVID-19 and bring it home to his 89-year-old grandmother, and she will die. And that person will never recover. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you guys listening.
Sir, thank you so much for taking some time out of your night to share with us the current status of COVID-19. I'm looking at my chat, and it seems that we have, between 4 and 5 questions. So I'm going to filter a few and get them to you. How does that sound?
Sounds wonderful, my friend.
Perfect, sir. Well, the first question that we have reads as follows. What can we say to friends and family to encourage them to take the vaccine?
Okay, great question. We can say to our friends and our family that I love you, I want you around, and coronavirus is no joke. I want you to be as healthy as possible and for you to protect your family and not to bring this thing home to them. That's what you got to tell them. You got to look them in the eye and tell them I love you, and I don't want you to get sick, and I don't want you to make your family sick. This is so far away from the Tuskegee experiment in the 1940s. For us to continue to use that excuse, it just breaks my heart. These vaccines have been incredibly researched. In fact, these are the most studied and researched vaccines in the history of mankind from around the world. And so tell them this is the safest thing that we've ever done from the health perspective. And so you got nothing to fear.
Understandable, sir. Our second question is as follows. In living with the COVID endemic, what will normal look like?
Great question. And again, I don't have a crystal ball, but I can certainly follow the science. The people in China, after their flu pandemic in the mid-2018s, they have subsequently worn a mask forever thereafter. And they still got their butts kicked with coronavirus. So I see a future in America where people are going to wear masks, they're going to put on them gloves, and they are not going to be hugging and kissing strangers. They're going to figure out ways to go to cookouts and mitigate their exposure to each other because they don't know the people who are there. They're going to go to work remotely. I think these are all permanent changes that our culture are going to adopt in the endemic phase. Because we didn't get terrified as we did from flu. And so these are some permanent changes I expect are going to take place. We're going to have more Zoom meetings. We're going to have more remote activities. There's going to be fewer conferences and conventions that we used to enjoy. Me as a doctor, I used to love palling around with my colleagues and drinking pina coladas in Las Vegas. A lot of that stuff is over. So that's what the endemic, and I think the restaurant industry, the hotel industry, they're in trouble because some of us are never going back to buffets and public restaurants and things. That's just not ever going to happen again.
Sir, I was born in Okinawa, Japan, and I can tell you, post-SARS, that entire country/continent, they really did kind of change and modify to the new normal. So understandable how that's going to affect the United States. And sir, we'll do one last question. And the question is as follows. What is it about diabetes that makes COVID so dangerous? And I'll actually modify that. I think not just diabetes, but any sort of pre-existing condition. How does that exacerbate what COVID does to the human body?
Okay, excellent question. So way down on the molecular level, diabetes kills certain cells. We know that it kills the pancreatic islet cells, the cells that create insulin in the pancreas. But it also makes you develop blindness from retinopathy. It kills your kidneys and you end up on dialysis. It makes you lose the feeling in your feet and you end up losing your feet. They chop your feet off from poor diabetes care. The same way, the molecules of diabetes and excess sugar destroy the inner cells of the lungs and of the heart and of the respiratory system in general. So, diabetes doesn't cause you to have a lung transplant, but it is absolutely destroying the receptors in those organs that you need to live and survive. So, you got poorly controlled diabetes, and along comes COVID-19. They're like, I see those lungs aren't looking so good. I see your heart's not looking so good. You got an enlarged heart from hypertension for 40 years, and I see most of the cells in your heart are now damaged or not working. And corona just takes over the few that remain, the ones that are viable, the ones that are still living. And that's how corona kills folks with poorly controlled chronic diseases. Because the same way it makes you go blind and lose your feet, this virus has the ability to help kill you in other ways too. And that's just a shame.
Thank you, sir, for that response. I think we're waiting for maybe one Zoom question. I'll give it about 10 seconds or so. And if we don't get any from the Zoom, I'll go ahead and pass it. Oh, right there. This will be the last one then. So can COVID be transmitted between humans and animals?
Generally speaking, no. There is no evidence of that at all. In fact, we were all terrified about that in the early stages of the pandemic, but there seems to be no relationship between COVID and animals at all. This is a human to human thing. We cough and sneeze on each other and touch each other while washing our hands.
Sounds good, sir. And actually, before I kind of close and thank you for coming, I kind of want to give you the final word. Do you have any parting shots to everyone that's going to listen live or that is going to watch the recording? Any final words about pandemic-related things in your perspective?
I guess the most important thing I want you guys to take from this is that I am here as a resource. Whether you're looking at it live or you watch it online or the recorded version, people like me are out here. We have a huge Black medical society here. It's called the Greater Norfolk Medical Society of the Southampton Roads. And you got to use us as a resource. We don't expect anything in return. We are here as a resource. We want our community to be healthy and to thrive. And that is my parting comment. Use your resources. Don't be afraid to ask. There is no stupid question. We are here.
Copy all, sir. Well, Dr. Carter, thank you so much for taking time out of your practice and your schedule to join us here tonight. It really does my heart good to see, role models that are, 20, 30 years ahead that kind of paved the way. So thank you so much for joining us tonight and for sharing your expertise concerning the pandemic and COVID-19.
It's been an honor. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir. So for everyone else, thank you so much for joining us. I'm actually going to turn it over to our president, Vice Mayor Jimmy Gray, who will now give some concluding remarks. Thank you so much. Sir, over to you.
Good. Thank you, Philip. And many thanks to Dr. Imhotep Carter for that very informative presentation on COVID-19 and the Omicron variant. Very timely information. And Dr. Carter, we really thank you, one, for being willing to share your knowledge on the subject of COVID and Omicron with the community, but also to support, and we really appreciate your support of the Hampton Roads community of 200 plus men and our efforts to build a better community by making a better life for African-American young people, adults, and helping them reach their highest potential. And this is just one of the many forums that we present to the community on important topics that we think are very informative and timely information to members of the Hampton Roads community. So again, thank you, Dr. Carter. To our viewers this evening, I invite you to visit our website. You see the website address scrolling on the screen, hr200plusmen.org, to learn more about our organization, the programs, and presentations that we offer to the community. Our 200+ Scholars Academy, mentoring 13 and 14-year-old African-American males in the country, in the community, with developmental activities, enrichment activities, mentorship, and helping them reach their fullest potential and graduate on time. Also, another initiative that we have that you can learn more about on our website is the Green Book Initiative. We are assembling a online directory of SWAM certified women, minority-owned businesses in the Hampton Roads community to make that information available to those who may, one, being willing to support those businesses, but also to help them grow in the community through economic support. So learn more about the Green Book initiatives, and if you're a business person in the Hampton Roads community, you can certainly sign up and enroll your business in this initiative. And then lastly, I want to say that this will be the 24th year that we will be presenting the 200+ Scholars Breakfast, May 14th, 9 o'clock at the Virginia Beach Community Center. And we will be presenting this year's graduating class of African-American males who are graduating with a 3.0 or better GPA from Hampton Roads public and private schools. We're looking forward to honoring this year's class, and we hope you will join us. Follow our website and stay tuned for more information. So with that, thank you for joining us this evening. And again, we look forward to continuing to present forums of this type to the community. And you can learn more about what we're doing by visiting our website. Again, Hampton Roads 200+ Men, HR 200+men.org. And good evening, and thank you for joining us.